I'm Harper. I'm 45 years old, and my own father publicly humiliated me at my brother's promotion party, calling me a failure in front of everyone. But before I tell you how his boss ended up calling me ma'am and changing everything in a single night, do me a favor and let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. It's always amazing to see how far these stories travel. It all started, as it so often did in my family, with a phone call from my mother. The screen on my phone lit up with her name, Mom, and a familiar, bitter wave of anxiety washed over me. For 15 years, her calls were rarely just to say hello. They were summons, they were warnings, or worse, they were reminders of my official status as the family's greatest disappointment. I let it ring twice, a small act of defiance before taking a deep breath and swiping to answer. Harper, honey, how are you? Her voice was a symphony of forced cheerfulness. It was the sound of someone walking on eggshells, a sound I knew all too well. That was always the first sign that the call wasn't for me, but for them. I'm doing okay, Mom. Everything all right? I kept my own voice carefully neutral, leaning against the worn kitchen counter of my small two-bedroom apartment. From the corner of my eye, I could see my daughter, Leo, at the dining table. Her 10-year-old brow furrowed in concentration over her math homework. She was the center of my universe, the one pure thing that this impending phone call couldn't touch. Oh, everything's just wonderful. Your brother Kevin, he got the big promotion. Vice President of Regional Development. Can you believe it? Your father is just bursting with pride. He's been insufferable all week in the best way. Of course, I could picture my father Richard perfectly, a man whose pride was a finite resource, a treasure he hoarded and bestowed only upon my younger brother, the golden boy. That's great news for him, I said. And the sad part is, I meant it. In some distant, detached part of my heart, a part that hadn't yet been completely calloused over. I was happy for Kevin's success. We're throwing a big party for him on Saturday night at the Oak Room, she continued, the cheerful veneer starting to thin, revealing the commanding tone underneath. To celebrate. It's a very big deal. His in-laws will be there, all the important clients, and Richard's boss, the CEO, Mr. Thompson, is even stopping by. Here it comes, I thought, bracing myself. The real reason for the call. I'm telling you this so you're aware, she said, and the unspoken words hung heavy in the silence between us. This is not an invitation, it's a notification. Now, Harper, if you decide to come, and I'm not saying you should or shouldn't, but if you do, please, for my sake, try to look presentable. Wear a nice blouse, and just don't make things awkward. This is Kevin's night. We don't want any scenes. Don't embarrass us. The words she didn't say were always the loudest. For 15 years, since the day my father threw my worn suitcase onto the perfectly manicured lawn and disowned me, I had been the family's walking, talking embarrassment. My crime? I had refused to follow the path he'd laid out for me since birth, taking over his small but locally successful construction business. I wanted to build things with code, not concrete. I saw the future in silicon and circuits, not bricks and mortar. To him, it was the ultimate betrayal of our family's legacy. I'll think about it, Mom, I said, my throat suddenly feeling tight and dry. Well, just be smart about it. That's all I ask. Okay, honey, I have to go. Your father's calling me. Love you. The line went dead before I could reply. I stood there for a long moment, the phone still pressed against my ear, listening to the dial tone. I wasn't just an embarrassment. I was a ghost they had to occasionally acknowledge. A specter they feared might rattle its chains at an inopportune moment. A ghost who was expected to behave herself at the feast of the living. A bitter taste filled my mouth. For years, I would have just ignored it. I would have stayed home, swallowed the familiar hurt, and let them have their perfect family picture without the black sheep spoiling the frame. But things were different now. I was different. I put the phone down on the counter, my hands surprisingly steady. I walked into the living room and watched my daughter. She was chewing on the end of her pencil, a small frown on her face. She looked up and saw me. Mom, what's 8 all 7? I smiled. 56. Oh yeah, she scribbled it down. She was the reason everything was different. She was the reason I'd worked 3 jobs while putting myself through night school, surviving on 4 hours of sleep. She was the reason I'd poured every spare dollar and every waking hour of the last 5 years into a risky tech startup I ran out of my garage. She was the reason I couldn't be a ghost anymore. A ghost can't be a role model. My decision was made. But I wasn't going to walk into that party as the family failure, cap in hand, hoping for a crumb of acceptance. I was going to walk in as myself, and I was going to do it on my own terms. I picked up my phone again, but this time I didn't call a family member. I scrolled to a different name, one that represented the new life I had built in the shadows. My lawyer. "Mr. Davies," I said when he answered, my voice crisp and clear. "It's Harper. I just received the expected summons. The event is Saturday night." There was a brief professional pause on the other end. "Understood," Mr. Davies replied, his voice the epitome of calm competence. "The portfolio is updated as of this morning, and the preliminary asset review is finalized and ready for presentation. We are prepared to proceed whenever you give the word." "Good," I said, a strange sense of calm settling over me, displacing the anxiety. "Stay on standby. I'll be in touch." I hung up. For the first time in 15 years, I wasn't just bracing for a storm, I was becoming one. The drive to the Oak Room on Saturday night was a pilgrimage through a landscape of ghosts. Every mile closer to the lavish restaurant was a mile deeper into the memories I'd fought so hard to bury. I glanced in the rearview mirror. Leo was sitting in the back seat, fidgeting with the knot on her new tie, her eyes wide with a nervous excitement that was both endearing and heartbreaking. For her, this was a grand adventure, a chance to see the grandparents she barely knew. The uncle she'd been told was so important. For me, it was a return to the scene of the crime, the place where my first life had ended. My car, a reliable but unremarkable 10-year-old sedan, felt like a dinghy in a sea of yachts. As I pulled into the valet line, it was sandwiched between a gleaming new black Mercedes and a polished silver BMW. The air itself seemed different here, thicker, scented with expensive perfume, quiet money, and the unshakable confidence of people who had never had to worry about making rent. This was my brother's world, a world I was supposed to have inherited. As I handed the keys to the young valet, a memory, sharp and unwelcome, ambushed me. It wasn't a faded photograph. It was a full-color, high-definition replay. I was 20 years old, standing on the same perfectly manicured lawn I'd spent my childhood playing on. My cheap canvas suitcase was at my feet, burst open from where my father had thrown it from the porch. Its meager contents, a few changes of clothes, some textbooks, a framed photo of my grandmother, spilling onto the grass like guts. "You want to go play with computers like a child?" my father, Richard, had roared. His face, normally ruddy, was a terrifying shade of purple. A vein throbbed in his temple. "You want to throw away a business that has fed this family for 2 generations? A business your grandfather built with his bare hands for some stupid daydream?" "It's not a daydream, Dad," I had pleaded, my voice cracking. "It's the future. Technology is changing everything, even construction." "It's not our future," he'd spat the word like a weapon, using it to exclude me. "Our future is in this soil, in the foundations we lay, not in some fantasy box of wires and lights. You're a fool, and you're no daughter of mine." I had turned desperately to my mother. Helen stood on the porch, a fragile silhouette against the warm light of the home I was being exiled from. She was wringing her hands, tears streaming down her face, but she didn't say a single word to defend me. She didn't move. Her silence was not neutrality. It was a choice. It was an endorsement of his cruelty. In that moment, watching her choose her husband's rage over her daughter's pain, something inside me broke. It was the naive, childish belief that family meant unconditional love. That day, I learned it was highly conditional, and the primary condition was absolute, unquestioning obedience. "Get off my property," my father had said, his voice dropping to a low, chilling command. I'll never forget the feeling of turning my back on that house, the only home I'd ever known. The walk down that long driveway felt like a mile. I left with $237 in my pocket and a profound, aching sense of failure that clung to me like a second skin. The first few years were a brutal education in humility. I learned what it felt like to be invisible. I was a dishwasher in a greasy diner, my hands perpetually raw and smelling of bleach. I was a warehouse stalker on the graveyard shift, my body aching under fluorescent lights as I lifted boxes for faceless corporations. I was a nighttime security guard at an empty office park, my only company the ghosts of 9-to-5 ambition. During that time, I met Daniel. She was a waitress at the diner, smart and funny, with eyes that saw past the uniform. We fell in love with the desperation of 2 lonely people, and for a while I thought I'd found a new beginning. We had Leo. Holding my newborn daughter for the first time was the purest moment of joy I had ever known. She was perfect. She was mine. I thought she would be the glue that held us together. But a new life can't be built on a cracked foundation. Our relationship crumbled under the relentless pressure of financial stress and my own unresolved baggage. We argued about money, about the long hours I worked, about the haunted look in my eyes that never seemed to go away. The final fight was the worst. "I can't do this anymore, Harper," she'd sobbed. Leo sleeping in the other room. "It's like you're not even here. You're still back in that town, in that house, fighting a battle with a man who doesn't even know you exist anymore. You're so obsessed with proving your father wrong that you've forgotten how to live." It was a painful, ugly divorce of our lives, a separation that left me feeling more alone than ever. She left a month later. She didn't fight for custody. She knew I would never let Leo go, and I think a part of her knew she was better off with me. But finding myself a single mother, solely responsible for this incredible little girl, with the ghosts of my past still rattling their chains in every corner of my tiny apartment, that was my rock bottom. Looking at Leo's innocent face one night as she slept, I knew Daniel had been right. I had to stop fighting my father's battle. I had to start fighting my own. I couldn't let my daughter's life be defined by my father's rejection. She deserved a mother who was a creator, not a victim, a mother who was proud of herself. So I began to fight back. In the dark, in secret, I enrolled in night classes for coding and business management at the local community college. I devoured books on investment, market trends, and corporate structure. I took every penny I saved and, instead of trying to get a newer car or a bigger apartment, I started to build. My garage, a cramped, dusty space that smelled of oil and damp concrete, became my sanctuary and my laboratory. It was lit by a single bare bulb, filled with secondhand computer parts I'd bought for cheap, and dominated by a massive whiteboard covered in complex algorithms and business models. My project was a healthcare logistics software. My time working in a warehouse had shown me the incredible inefficiencies in supply chain management. I saw a problem, and I was determined to solve it. It was ambitious. It was a long shot. It was my everything. For 5 years, it was my entire life outside of my daughter and my day job. The breakthrough came from a chance encounter. I ran into an old high school friend, another Daniel, at a coffee shop. I was on my lunch break from a landscaping job, my hands covered in dirt and grime. I was embarrassed, but she just smiled, her eyes kind. She had become a successful tech consultant. Against my better judgment, I found myself telling her about my project, my voice hesitant at first, then gaining passion as I explained the concept. I expected the polite dismissal, the condescending pat on the back. Instead, she listened, really listened. She asked questions, smart, probing questions, that showed she understood not just the tech, but the business potential. The next week, she came to my garage. She didn't see the mess or the secondhand equipment. She looked at my messy whiteboard, at the elegant lines of code on my monitor, and she saw something no one else had. She saw the future. "Harper," she'd said, her eyes shining with a genuine, infectious excitement. "This is brilliant. This is disruptive. You need real funding. You need to get out of this garage." Daniel didn't just offer encouragement. She became my champion. She believed in me when I was barely believing in myself. She introduced me to a small group of angel investors she knew. They were skeptical. I was a single mom with a community college degree and a garage full of junk. But the code was undeniable. The business plan was meticulous. They gave me a chance, a small seed investment that felt like $1 billion. That was 5 years ago. My company, which I'd named China Phoenix Innovations, had grown in silence. We operated under a different corporate name for our public-facing products, keeping my involvement a closely guarded secret. I remained the anonymous founder, the ghost in the machine. A year ago, we'd secured a massive round of Series A funding. And then 6 months ago, Daniel brought me the opportunity that felt like destiny. The very corporation my father and brother worked for, a large regional construction and development conglomerate called Richard & Son Legacy Holdings, a name my father had chosen as a constant petty jab at me, was floundering. Years of bad management, a failure to adapt to new technologies, and a couple of disastrous projects had left them financially vulnerable. They were secretly looking for a massive capital injection, a buyout of a controlling stake, to avoid a catastrophic bankruptcy. It's a perfect acquisition for our portfolio, Daniel had said, her voice calm as she showed me the financials. Their infrastructure assets are incredibly undervalued. Their brand still has regional recognition. With our logistics and management tech integrated, we could triple their efficiency and profitability in 2 years. And there it was, the ultimate staggering irony, the chance to own the very world that had cast me out. I wasn't just buying a company, I was buying back my own narrative. I was taking control of my own legacy. We made the purchase through a series of shell corporations and investment vehicles, a complex web that made the ultimate owner impossible to trace. I became the single largest and completely anonymous shareholder. I owned 40%. I owned them. And I had waited for 6 months. I had watched from the shadows, learning every aspect of the business, waiting for the perfect moment. My mother's phone call was that moment. It was the invitation I had been waiting for. "Mom, are we going in?" Leo's voice, small and hopeful, pulled me from the depths of the past and back to the brightly lit entrance of the oak room. She was looking at me, her expression a mixture of excitement and a child's sensitivity to her parents' mood. I forced a smile, pushing the dark memories away. "Yeah, buddy, we're going in." I put my hand on her shoulder, a small anchor in a turbulent sea, and steered her toward the ornate wooden doors. I wasn't the broken 20-year-old on the lawn anymore. I wasn't the struggling single mom, ashamed of her dirty hands. I was a woman who had built her own world from the ashes of the one she'd lost. And tonight, for the first time, those two worlds were about to collide with the force of a supernova. The moment we stepped through the doors of the oak room, the warmth and noise of the party washed over us like a wave. The room was a glittering spectacle of my brother's success. It buzzed with the self-important conversations of the local elite, the clinking of champagne glasses, and laughter that sounded just a little too loud, a little too forced. It was a sea of expensive suits, elegant dresses, and the kind of easy confidence that comes from never having to check your bank balance. My father, Richard, stood near the center of the room, a proud patriarch holding court. His chest was puffed out, a broad, satisfied smile plastered on his face, as he shook hands with a portly man dripping with gold jewelry. My brother Kevin was at his side, soaking in the adoration, looking smug and triumphant. He had the look of a man who believed he had earned everything that had ever been handed to him. Then my father's eyes swept the room and landed on me. It was as if a switch had been flipped. His smile vanished, instantly replaced by a scowl of pure, undiluted contempt. The transformation was so immediate, so visceral, it was as if I were a foul odor that had just drifted into his pristine environment. "What in God's name is she doing here?" he said. Not to me, but to my mother, who was standing nearby, adjusting the strap on her pearl necklace. His voice was a low growl, but in a momentary lull in the conversation, it carried. A few people nearby turned to look, their curiosity piqued. "Helen, I thought I told you I didn't want her here. Tonight of all nights." "Richard, please keep your voice down," my mother whispered, her face flushing with a familiar mixture of fear and embarrassment. "She's still your daughter. Think of the appearances. It would look worse if she wasn't here." For appearances. That's all I was, a prop to maintain the illusion of a normal family. I ignored them, my immediate focus on shielding Leo from the fallout. I knelt down, bringing my face level with hers. "Hey, champ, you see that big table over there with the fancy punch bowl and the little hot dogs? Go grab us a couple of Cokes, okay? I'll find us a spot." Leo, bless her innocent heart, seemed largely oblivious to the undercurrent of hostility. She nodded eagerly, her eyes fixed on the promise of miniature hot dogs, and navigated her way through the forest of adult legs. I watched her go before straightening up and facing my parents. My mother offered me a tight, pleading smile that didn't reach her eyes. My father just glared, his jaw set like concrete. "Don't you dare cause a scene, Harper," my father muttered, stepping closer so only I could hear. "This is your brother's night, a night he earned. Don't you ruin it with your presence." "I have no intention of causing a scene," I replied, my voice perfectly even, a calm I didn't entirely feel. "I'm just here to congratulate Kevin." Before he could retort, a young hostess with a clipboard and a practiced smile came up to me. "Name, ma'am?" "Harper," I said. She scanned her list, her polished fingernail running down the page. Her smile faltered for a fraction of a second, then returned strained. "Oh, yes. I'm so sorry, ma'am. It seems your assigned table is just over here." She led me away from the main cluster of elegantly decorated round tables, each with a beautiful floral centerpiece. She led me past the smaller, but still respectable, four tops. She led me to a small, sad-looking two-top, a tiny circle of tablecloth-covered wood tucked away in a dark corner. It was positioned so close to the swinging double doors of the kitchen that I could feel a constant draft and hear the clatter of dishes and the barked orders of the chef. It was a deliberate, calculated insult, the social equivalent of being told to eat in the hallway with the servants. This was my designated place in the family hierarchy, out of sight, out of mind, and next to the garbage. I just nodded at the hostess, giving her a small, reassuring smile. "Thank you, this is perfect." She looked relieved to escape, scurrying back to the warmth of the main room. I saw my Aunt Carol, my mother's sister, watching from a nearby table filled with other relatives. She caught my eye and gave me a weak, sympathetic grimace, a silent apology, before my Uncle Robert said something to her and she quickly looked away. She was a good person, fundamentally, but like my mother, her spine had long ago been dissolved by my father's acidic personality. She was a reluctant witness to my family's quiet cruelties, and her guilt made her complicit. Leo returned, carefully balancing 2 glasses of Coke. Her smile faltered as she saw our isolated, pathetic little table. "Mom, why are we sitting here? It's so far away." "It's the best seat in the house, buddy," I said with a conspiratorial wink. "It's the spy table. We can see everyone from here, but they can't see us. We're on a secret mission." Her eyes lit up. "A secret mission?" "Yep, mission, observe and report," I said, tapping the side of my nose. She giggled and seemed to accept it, climbing into her chair. For the next hour, we were an island in the middle of their ocean. We were invisible. People would walk by on their way to the restrooms. Some old family friends would offer a hesitant nod or a flicker of recognition before being pulled away by a spouse. But no one stopped to talk. We were a social contagion. I didn't mind. It gave me time to observe, just as I told Leo. I saw my brother Kevin, preening. He was the star of the show, and he was playing the part with gusto. He moved from group to group, telling some story that had them all captivated, his hands gesturing wildly. He'd always been the performer, the one who craved the spotlight, while I had been content to work behind the scenes. Then came the speeches. The clinking of a spoon on a glass silenced the room. My father took the microphone first, his voice booming with a manufactured emotion that sounded like pride. He talked about his brilliant, hardworking son, Kevin. He spoke of legacy, of family values, of the importance of loyalty, of making a father proud. Every word, every theme was a subtle poison dart aimed directly at me. I just sipped my Coke and watched the show. Then it was Kevin's turn. He took the stage, basking in the applause. He thanked everyone for coming. He thanked his beautiful wife, Chloe, who sat at the head table looking stunning in a green dress, but her smile seemed painted on. He thanked his wonderful, supportive parents. And then he looked out over the crowd, his eyes scanning the room until they landed on me. Huddled in my dark corner, a malicious, triumphant glint appeared in his eyes. He saw his chance for a public execution, and he took it. "I also want to give a special shout-out to my big sister Harper for being here tonight," he said, a cruel smirk playing on his lips. The spotlight operator, taking the cue, swung a beam of light over to my table, illuminating me and Leo in a sudden, harsh glare. I felt my daughter flinch beside me. It's really inspiring to see her. She's a great reminder for all of us that not every path leads to success. It reminds us to be grateful for what we have. Because some people, they chase these foolish, cheap dreams, and they end up with nothing but the dream. The room filled with a sickening mixture of sycophantic chuckles from my father's cronies and a deeply uncomfortable silence from everyone else. It was a direct shot, a perfectly aimed bullet designed to humiliate me in front of my daughter, my family, and the entire business community. I felt a hot flush of pure rage creep up my neck. I looked at my mother. She was smiling, a strained, artificial smile, as if her son had just told a charmingly self-deprecating joke. No defense. Not even a flicker of disapproval. She was clapping softly. I glanced over at the head table again. Kevin's wife, Chloe, was not smiling. She was not clapping. She was staring down at her plate, her knuckles white as she gripped her fork. I saw her jaw tighten, a muscle flexing in her cheek. It was a fleeting expression, but I saw it clearly. She was disgusted, not with me, but with her husband. That was more than interesting. It was a crack in the fortress. I filed it away. But the final, sharpest blow didn't come from the stage. It came from the chair beside me. Leo, who had understood the insult with the brutal clarity of a child, leaned over and whispered, her voice small and trembling, her words a dagger to my heart. "Mom, are you a cheap dream?" Her question hit me with the force of a physical blow. I had spent 15 years building a shield of indifference, a fortress of solitude around my heart. But the genuine pain in my daughter's eyes pierced right through it all. To see myself reflected as a failure in her eyes, that was something I would not bear. That was it. The mission was over. I had been a fool to think this could work. My presence here wasn't teaching her about dignity. It was just marinating her in my family's unique brand of poison. I stood up, my chair scraping loudly against the floor, the sound unnaturally loud in the sudden quiet that followed the speech. "Let's go, Leo." "Where are we going?" she asked, her eyes filled with confusion and hurt. "Home," I said, my voice thick with an emotion I was struggling to suppress. This was a mistake. I took her hand, her small fingers wrapping around mine. I didn't look at anyone. I was done. I would not subject my daughter to another minute of this toxic theater. My grand plan, my carefully constructed evening of revelation, it didn't matter anymore. All that mattered was protecting the small girl holding my hand. We started walking toward the exit, a walk of shame that felt 100 miles long. My head was down, my focus singular. "Get out, get her out." And that's when a calm, clear, authoritative voice cut through the air, stopping me dead in my tracks, just 10 feet from the door. "Harper, I was hoping I'd see you here." I stopped, my hand still gripping Leo's. The voice was unmistakable. It was calm. It was measured. And it carried an effortless authority that silenced rooms. I looked up. Standing directly in our path, effectively blocking our exit, was Mr. Thompson. He was the CEO of the entire conglomerate, a man my father spoke of with a reverence usually reserved for founding fathers and deities. He was in his late 60s with a full mane of silver hair, a tailored suit that probably cost more than my car, and an aura of quiet, unshakable power. He wasn't smiling at me. He was looking at me with an expression of serious professional respect that was so out of place in this context, it felt like a glitch in the matrix. My father and Kevin, who had been watching my attempted retreat with smug, victorious satisfaction, froze mid-smirk. Their expressions morphed into a comical mask of pure, unadulterated confusion. "Mr. Thompson," my father stammered, rushing forward with a clumsy, flustered energy. He was like a courtier, scrambling to intercept an assassin. "I'm so terribly sorry about this interruption. This is my other daughter, Harper. A bit of a family issue. She was just leaving." He actually tried to physically steer me aside, putting a hand on my shoulder as if I were a piece of furniture that was out of place. Mr. Thompson completely, utterly ignored him. It was a masterclass in social annihilation. He didn't even flicker his eyes in my father's direction. His gaze remained fixed on me. "We need to talk about the Q3 projections for the new logistics integration," he said, his voice low but carrying with perfect clarity in the now silent room. "Your preliminary models are aggressive. I like them, but the board has some questions about the capital expenditure for the fleet upgrade. They're getting cold feet." The world seemed to slow down. The ambient noise faded into a dull hum. I could feel dozens of pairs of eyes on us. The phrase, "your preliminary models," hung in the air, electric and utterly incomprehensible to everyone but me and the man in front of me. I met his gaze. The part of me that was the angry daughter, the hurt sister, receded. The part of me that was the CEO of Phoenix Innovations took over. "The models are based on a full-scale implementation, as requested," I replied, my voice steady, the earlier emotion now replaced by a cold, sharp focus. "The CapEx is front-loaded, but the ROI is realized within 18 months. If the board is hesitant, the projections will need to be adjusted accordingly. But we'd be leaving a significant amount of money on the table. It would be a timid move." Mr. Thompson nodded slowly, a flicker of a smile finally touching his lips. "My thoughts exactly. Timid. I'm glad you're here. It's good for you to observe the new management firsthand before the quarterly board meeting." He glanced, meaningfully, for just a second, toward Kevin, who looked as if he'd been struck by lightning. "Quarterly board meeting?" my father echoed, his voice a hoarse, strangled whisper. He looked like a man trying to read a foreign language. "What are you talking about? She's not on any board. Mr. Thompson finally turned to look at my father, and his expression was one of genuine, mild annoyance, as if he were dealing with a particularly slow child. Richard, you have a daughter who is a key strategic player in the future of this company, and you have her sitting at a table next to the kitchen. What in the world is wrong with you? The public rebuke, delivered in that calm, conversational tone, was more devastating than a shout. My father recoiled as if he'd been physically slapped. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. His eyes darted from Mr. Thompson to me and back again, his brain visibly crashing as it tried to process two completely contradictory realities. Kevin, ever the performer, tried to salvage the situation, forcing a laugh that sounded like a cough. Mr. Thompson, sir, there must be some kind of misunderstanding, a mix-up. This is my sister Harper. She's in tech support or something like that. She's not on any board. The lie was so pathetic, so desperate, it was almost sad. Mr. Thompson didn't even grace him with a response. He just looked at me and raised a single silver eyebrow. The message was crystal clear. Your stage, your call. How do you want to play this? This was it. The moment I had been planning for, the moment I had almost thrown away. The anger and hurt I'd felt moments ago were gone, replaced by the icy calm of a chess master who sees the board 5 moves ahead. My daughter was watching. My family was watching. The entire room was watching. I let the silence stretch for a beat, then another. I savored the rising panic and confusion on my father's and brother's faces. Then I made my first move. I deliberately turned my back on them, and on Mr. Thompson, and walked toward a small group of men standing nearby. I recognized one of them instantly. David Chun, a major real estate developer, a shark my father had been trying to land for a massive new downtown partnership for months. I extended a hand to him, my expression open and friendly. David, good to see you again, I said, as if we were old friends who had just spoken last week. Harper, we haven't been formally introduced, he replied, eyeing me closely. But I've been reviewing the file on your proposed riverfront partnership. There are some interesting opportunities there, but I have some concerns about the zoning variances. Mr. Chun, a savvy 60-year-old businessman who hadn't gotten where he was by being slow, immediately sensed the dramatic shift in the power dynamic. He looked past me, at my father's stunned face, at Mr. Thompson's knowing calm, and he put the pieces together in an instant. He shook my hand firmly, his grip strong. A pleasure, Harper, a real pleasure. And you're right to have concerns. The city council is playing hardball. I'd love to discuss it with you at your convenience. Perhaps my office on Monday? Of course, I said with an easy smile. My assistant will call yours to set it up. I then turned back to my father, who was staring at me as if I had just sprouted a second head. The wind had not just shifted. A tremor had just run through the foundation of his world, and the earthquake was coming. My father finally found his voice, a strained, choked sound that was barely a whisper. He grabbed my arm, his fingers, once so strong and intimidating, now feeling surprisingly weak. His grip was desperate. What is this, Rand? He hissed, his eyes wild with a fear that was rapidly eclipsing his anger. He tried to pull me away from the group, back toward the dark corner where my table of shame was located. He wanted to contain this, to isolate the anomaly, to shove the impossible, terrifying truth back into the neat little box he'd built for me 15 years ago. I didn't resist. I let him lead me a few steps away from the prying ears of the guests, though I knew every single person in that room was still watching. Their conversations had died down to a collective voyeuristic hush. Kevin and my mother hovered behind him, their faces identical masks of disbelief and dawning horror. You're making a fool of me, my father snarled, his voice low and venomous, his face just inches from mine. This is a trick, a sick joke. You paid him, didn't you? You paid Thompson to say those things. Where did you get that kind of money? Did you borrow it? Did you steal it? I almost laughed. The sound bubbled up in my chest, a mixture of bitterness and irony. It was so perfectly, so predictably him. In his rigidly structured world, the only way I could possibly have any semblance of power was if I had faked it. The idea that I might have legitimately earned it was a concept so alien to his understanding of me that it simply did not compute. I looked him straight in the eye. The moment was finally here. No more hiding, no more innuendo, no more allowing him to dictate the terms of my existence. Just the plain, cold, hard, liberating truth. No, Dad, I said, my voice quiet but carrying the weight of 15 years of silenced rage and relentless work. I didn't pay him. I don't have to. I paused, letting the words sink in, watching the confusion flicker in his eyes. I own him. The blood drained from his face, leaving it a pasty, sickly gray. What? What did you just say? Let me be perfectly clear so there's absolutely no misunderstanding, I continued, enunciating every single word with surgical precision. 6 months ago, an investment firm acquired a 40% controlling stake in Richard & Son Legacy Holdings. That investment firm is a wholly owned subsidiary of a tech company called Phoenix Innovations. I paused for dramatic effect. And Phoenix Innovations is my company. Kevin made a strangled noise behind my father, a sort of gasp and a sob combined. No, that's not possible. That's a lie. You're lying. Then am I? I shifted my gaze to my brother, the golden boy, the vice president. He looked small and breakable. Your promotion, Kevin, the one we're all here to celebrate tonight, it came across the primary shareholder's desk for final approval last week. I signed off on it myself. I thought it would be good for family morale. I gave him a cold, empty smile. So, congratulations on the new position. Your first quarterly performance review and your future in this company will be with me. My mother put a hand to her mouth, a horrified whisper escaping her lips. Harper, no. How? How is this possible? How? The injustice of the past decade and a half welled up inside me like a tidal wave. While you were hosting parties and celebrating the golden boy, I said, I was working 18-hour days. While you were calling me a failure behind my back, I was building a company from scratch. While you were on family vacations in the Bahamas, I was in a freezing garage at 3 a.m., debugging code and drinking stale coffee. While you were telling me not to embarrass you, I was creating a multi-million-dollar software company from nothing. I did it without a cent of family money, without a single word of encouragement, without any of the advantages that were handed to him on a silver platter. I did it on my own. My father was shaking his head, a violent, jerky motion, his mind refusing to accept the reality crashing down upon him. The inheritance. You have nothing. I made you sign the papers. I saw you sign them. You gave up your rights to your grandfather's trust. This was it. The final pillar of his authority. The ultimate tool of control he had held over me for my entire adult life. And it was time to turn it to dust. Ah, yes. The papers, I said with a theatrical sigh. The legal document you so kindly prepared for me. The one you had me sign a week after my 20th birthday when I was broke, homeless, and desperate. The one where I signed away my claim to grandfather's trust in exchange for a check for $5,000, which you told me was a generous final gift. I leaned in closer, my voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that only my family could hear. I have some bad news for you about that document, Dad. I had my lawyer, Mr. Davies, take a look at it a few months ago. And he's not just any lawyer. He's the head of corporate litigation at one of the top firms in the state. I let that hang in the air for a moment, watching the fear bloom in their eyes. Turns out, I continued, savoring each word, forcing a young adult to sign a complex legal document concerning a multi-generational trust under extreme emotional and financial duress and without the presence of her own independent legal counsel is highly unethical. In fact, Mr. Davies used the term unconscionable. More than that, the trust established by Grandpa had specific ironclad clauses against the primary heir being coerced into forfeiting her claim. It's an interesting legal gray area, but according to Mr. Davies, that document you've been holding over my head for 15 years, the foundation of your power over me. I smiled, a real smile this time. And is not worth the paper it's printed on. My father stared at me, his mouth agape, making small, gulping motions like a fish out of water. The foundation of his world, the power he wielded through money and control and inheritance, was not just cracking, it had been pulverized. He wasn't just losing control of his company. He was losing control of the past, of the very narrative he had so carefully and cruelly crafted. The whispers around the room had grown into a low roar. The truth was spreading like wildfire. The failed daughter wasn't a failure, she was the boss. The outcast was the kingmaker. I saw Chloe, my sister-in-law, walk purposefully toward Kevin. Her face was a storm of emotions, but the primary one was a cold, hard fury. She wasn't looking at me. She was looking at her husband with an expression of pure, unadulterated contempt. She said something to Shaish, her voice too low for me to hear, but the effect was instantaneous. Kevin, who had been pale before, now looked like he might actually collapse. He stumbled back a step, his face a mask of utter devastation. I had done it. I had taken back my story. I had won. But looking at the wreckage of my family's faces, I didn't feel the triumphant elation I had always imagined. I just felt a profound, tired, aching emptiness. The victory was real, but the wounds, I realized, were just as real. Then I felt a gentle tug on my sleeve. I looked down. It was Leo. She had been standing quietly beside me through the entire exchange. She looked from my face to the shattered expressions of her grandparents and uncle. Then she looked back at me, her eyes wide, not with pain or confusion anymore, but with a look of pure, unadulterated awe. "Mom," she whispered, "you're not a cheap dream. You're like a superhero." And in that moment, the emptiness vanished, replaced by a warmth that spread through my entire chest. In that moment, I knew that every second of the last 15 years had been worth it. The party didn't so much end as it dissolved. It died a swift, silent, awkward death. The festive atmosphere evaporated, leaving behind a thick, unbreathable tension. Guests, who moments before had been laughing and drinking, now started making their excuses. They offered quiet, mumbled goodbyes to no one in particular, their eyes darting nervously toward my family, who were huddled together like survivors of a shipwreck, their faces pale and drawn in the warm golden light of the restaurant. Chloe's confrontation with Kevin had been the final, fatal blow to the evening's charade. I didn't hear the words she spoke, but I saw the result with perfect clarity. After speaking to Kevin, she had turned on her heel, walked directly to her parents, who were watching with grim faces, and left the party without a single look back. The message was as clear as a pane of glass. The powerful alliance that had propped up Kevin's career and my family's social standing was irrevocably broken. I found out later, through the grapevine of gossip, that travels so quickly in those circles that she had told him in no uncertain terms that she could not be married to a man whose entire identity was a lie, a man built on a foundation of cruelty and deceit. She had informed him that she would be speaking to her own family's lawyers on Monday morning about initiating divorce proceedings, and more importantly, about separating their assets. The significant dowry of stock her wealthy family had invested in the corporation as a sign of goodwill was about to be pulled. For Kevin, it was a financial and social death sentence. My mother was the first to approach me after the room had half emptied, leaving us in a cavernous space that now felt cold and hostile. Her face was tear-streaked, her expensive makeup smudged, her carefully constructed composure shattered into a million pieces. "How could you?" she cried, her voice trembling with a strange, dissonant mixture of anger and self-pity. "How could you do this to your family in public, after everything we've done for you?" I looked at her, and for the first time in my life, I didn't see my mother. I saw a woman whose deepest, most primal fear wasn't my failure, but my independence. My failure was manageable. It confirmed her worldview. My success on my own terms was a threat to her very existence. "Everything you've done for me?" I responded, my voice devoid of heat, just a cold, tired calm. "What exactly was that? Was it when you stood by and watched him throw me out? Or was it the 15 years of phone calls reminding me not to be an embarrassment?" I gestured across the room. "My family is the 10-year-old girl standing over there, the one you've barely spoken 2 words to in her entire life. My brother is the man who publicly called me a cheap dream 10 minutes after I, his new boss, signed off on the promotion that would significantly increase his salary." "You hid this from us?" she accused, shifting tactics, her voice rising. "You lied to us for years." "No," I said, shaking my head slowly. "I didn't lie. I just stopped telling you my truths because it became very clear a long time ago that you never wanted to hear them." "You're not angry that I kept a secret, Mom. You're angry that you've lost control. You can't hold my father's approval over my head anymore. You can't threaten me with being cast out because I'm already out. I left that house 15 years ago. I just built my own." She flinched as if I'd physically struck her. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. She had no answer for that. The truth was a language she no longer spoke. My father was next. He lumbered over, his face a mottled, unhealthy red. The initial fury had been replaced by a desperate, sputtering disbelief, the look of a man who has lost his bearings in a world he thought he commanded. The inheritance, the trust. You can't touch it, he stammered, his words slurring slightly. It's not yours. I am the executor of the estate. You were, I corrected him gently. According to my lawyer, now that I am in a financial position to formally contest the invalid document you had me sign, and since I am the primary heir named in my grandfather's will, any probate court would likely grant me immediate control of the trust. We can find out for sure if you'd like. I'm sure a public legal battle over the family fortune, with all the sordid details of your coercion, would be wonderful for the company's stock price right now. The veiled threat was as effective as a physical blow. A divorce from reality was happening in his mind. The custody of the family legacy, the one thing he valued above all else, was now in my hands. He had lost on every front. He looked at me, this man who had been a giant in my life, a figure of absolute power and terrifying judgment, and for the first time I saw him for what he truly was. A small, frightened man, terrified of losing his status, terrified of becoming irrelevant. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. Defeated. Utterly and completely defeated. I felt a gentle tug on my sleeve. It was Leo. "Mom, can we go home now?" she asked, her voice soft. I looked down at her clear, trusting eyes, and all the anger, all the bitterness, all the years of resentment just melted away, leaving a clean, quiet space in their wake. "Yeah, buddy, we can go home." I took her hand, and without another word to my parents, we walked out of the Oak Room. We left the wreckage of their party and their lives behind us. The cool night air had never felt so fresh, so clean. As we waited for the valet to bring my car around, Mr. Thompson came out and stood beside us, a silent, supportive presence. "That was quite a night," he said with a small, wry smile. "I'm sorry you had to be a part of it," I said, meaning it. "Don't be," he replied, shaking his head. "I've been on corporate boards for 40 years, Harper. I've seen all kinds of hostile takeovers, but I've never seen one quite so personal. You have a good head on your shoulders, and a good daughter." He looked down at Leo and winked. "Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." He clapped me on the shoulder, a gesture of respect from one leader to another, and walked to his own car. As I watched him go, I realized he was right. It wasn't just a corporate takeover. It was a personal one. And the silence that followed was the sound of my own freedom.